Squirrels! So hello, and welcome to another Legends of Runeterra video. My name is Chris, and today we will be talking about some cards that I think could use with a nerf in the upcoming patch. I actually think that this is a pretty important patch, because I think if they get it right, it could really shake things up, and you know, if they do get it right and it just changes everything, I think it could be a very, very exciting thing. As you know, maybe with some of the new cards that just came out, you know, things could really become very different. Because I think what happened was the cards that came out very recently in the most recent sort of set, is it a set? What do they call it? I don't think it's called a set, but you know, the recent cards that came out, I don't think that they were quite good enough to, you know, really dethrone the decks that were already in the game. So I think once those top decks come down a bit, I think it could be a very, very interesting meta game indeed. And so we're going to go through some of the cards that I think you know, could use with a bit of a change perhaps, and suggest what changes those might be. Now, of course, if I've missed any out, it's very possible that I have, and I wouldn't be shocked if I did. I probably have. So, you know, mention those cards down below and leave a comment. And, you know, for any card, suggest the changes that you would make, or you know, if you think I'm wrong about something or whatever. I really enjoy debating these kind of things. And I think everyone, you know, who plays the game quite a lot, you know, probably has an opinion on what should happen with certain cards. But we're going to start with one I think isn't too controversial at all. And that is Sin. Who, ever since he got buffed majorly by both the changing of his champion spell to Sonic Wave and the fact that he became a 4-mana champion, he has been, you know, in large part dominating the metagame. And I think we all know and understand that Sin, probably it was similar to Braum, where, you know, they just went a bit too far with it and they need to tone it back down just a little bit, or maybe even quite a big bit. And so most of these changes, of course, would be numerical. I think most of the changes that they do anyway will always be numerical. You might get the odd one where it's sort of a full rework. I highly doubt they would rework Sin. I think as he is, you know, he fits very well. I think his leveled up ability is really cool and pretty unique. And so I'd be shocked if they actually changed the text part of Sin. I think it is going to have to be a numbers change. And so let's talk about what we could do. Well, of course, Sin could become 5 mana. If he did become 5 mana, they might increase his health up to 5. A lot of people might think that that would be going too far again. I think people underestimate how big a mana cost difference can be. And that, I think, is why, you know, people probably looked at the Sin buff and thought, oh, okay, he's probably going to be okay now, you know, from 6 to 4. Well, no, he became from 6 to 4. He becomes the best champion in the game. And I think that 1 mana would do more than you would think, you know, because the sort of decks that you see Sin playing, you know, they aren't going to play a lot of units early. And so if Sin costs 1 mana more and, you know, they were on the back foot for an extra turn, that can be the difference a lot of time. You know, I feel like aggro would probably have a very good time against Sin decks if that were the case. And so I think that is a viable option. Whether they go down that route or not, I don't know. Of course, you could also change his power down to 2. I think this would be the smallest change they could make. They could also change his toughness down to 3. I think that those changes... I think the 2 attack probably wouldn't do that much anyway, because of course you're playing Sin in a deck where you're using a lot of spells that will buff his attack anyway, so I don't think that that would be a big change. But changing his health down to 3 would probably do a little bit, but considering he gets barriers so easily, I don't think it would do that much. You know, again, you have to think of the kind of decks that he's synergizing with, and again, it wouldn't do that much, I don't think. It would be a noticeable difference, so I think that they might go down that path, but I'd be surprised. And finally, I think a very interesting way they could go about this is change his level up condition to be even more than 8. Say, you know, 10, 11, maybe even 12, but I think it would be more at 10 they would start at, if they were going to go down that route. And that would be a really interesting change, because it would mean that the delay in winning the game would be, I think, somewhat significant. That's probably, you're giving yourself a turn or two, maybe, extra to potentially win the game against Lee Sin decks, which could swing quite a few games. So I think that would be a very interesting change if they were to up this spell number quite a lot, and it might force the decks to, play less of certain spells and more of, smaller cost spells, so that they can try and get there quicker. We've seen the nerf to Ezreal that they did. Ezreal's text didn't change, but they upped his targets to 10, and now I don't think I've seen anyone play Ezreal. So it's very possible that could be a very viable change that would work in a lot of ways. And so personally, I'd be on board for either him becoming 5 mana. Even if it was 3/5, I still think that would be a nerf worth considering. I don't think the difference between 4 and 5 is that much. There are a lot of, things that have 5 attack anyway. Swiftwing Lancer could deal with a Lee Sin, for instance, if it didn't have barrier, that kind of stuff. Like, 5 isn't impossible. I think 6 is much more of a problematic number. I think we all know Lee Sin needs to get nerfed, and I think I'd be shocked if he didn't get nerfed. The next card I want to bring attention to, again, I don't think will come as any great surprise. We're sort of starting with the ones I think are pretty obvious and out there, and it's Pale Cascade. And I think that I gave quite a bit of discussion to Lee Sin, because I think obviously with champions there's a lot of different things that you can do. With spells like this, I think it's very, very simple. And I think this change would do everything that the card needs and still keep it a perfectly playable card in certain decks, but not just an auto-include in every single Targon deck. And that is to change this to give an ally 2/0 this round, Nightfall, draw 1. I think that would keep in theme exactly what you want. Of course, this is Diana's champion card. But even if you take away this health gain, it still synergizes really well with Diana, because she's got quick attack and, potentially challenger as well. So it still works perfectly fine with Diana. You're still drawing the card, which is, I think, where the main power of the card comes from. But you're not getting the 1 extra health, which means that certain times you won't trade. Which means that certain decks, certain slower decks, might not want this card. You might only want it, in sort of Nightfall decks or other decks where, you are playing aggressive Targon. And I think that's fine. It's fine to have a card that's good in a certain archetype within a region. Even if it's a very strong card within that archetype, that's great. That's probably what you want, to be honest. So I think that's a very easy change to make. And I'd be somewhat surprised if this card didn't see a little bit of a change. Because it is just so strong. It's just such a good card. And it's, the reason that Diana... The main reason why Diana is considered, pretty good is because drawing second Diana gives you a really good card as well. So, yeah, I think that would be a pretty reasonable change. But, maybe I'm a fool. Maybe someone else has come up with an idea which, fixes this card even better. But I think that draw 1 is somewhat crucial to the card, as it helps out the Nightfall archetype itself as well. Okay, this one, we're getting a little bit spicier now. I doubt many people saw this one coming. This one, I would be surprised if they nerfed, to be honest, straight away. It's a new card. It's Astral Protection, 4 mana, heal an ally 4, grant it +0/4. I don't think we really fully grasped how much of a difference this card can make. And sometimes, and I remember I played this card, the first time I was playing like Tahm Kench Soraka, I put like 1 of in this deck, and I remember playing it and be like, oh my god, like that's amazing. Like it did so much. And yeah, and I think people sort of slowly cottoned on like, oh yeah, this card can give you 8 health on something, particularly Tahm Kench. And that's really good. And I think this card is really hard to nerf, because I'm pretty sure here it's kind of obvious they're going for the whole like cost 4, heal it 4, grant it 4, right? Like it's 4, it's 4. And so how the hell do you nerf this card if they're intent on keeping it all 4s. Now, as I say, I don't think this is probably one of, if not the least problematic card. I'm sure a lot of you, as I say, is a bit spicier. I just think it is a really good card. You might say that it only fits certain decks, and that is probably somewhat true. But I think that within those certain decks, this is a very, very, very strong card. Like, maybe a bit over the top of what, any card in a certain deck should do. And so, if they were unwilling to change the numbers on this card, which they obviously could do, right? This card is easy to fix if you're willing to change the numbers. You can make it 1 mana more, you can make it heal at 3 and grant 3, right? Like, it doesn't have, if it doesn't have to be 4, then it's simple, right? Obviously, the only other way you can change it is to make it fast speed. Now, I really don't like that. It's always sort of been, like these kind of spells, like they have to be burst speed, right? Because otherwise you're just going to get punished. And for something that's such a big effect as well, I don't see a way that they could make this fast speed without just completely killing the card. Like, if this said fast on it, like, no one would play the card. You would never see this playing ever again. This would just become a card that doesn't exist, and I don't like that. So personally, I hope that they can find a way to change the numbers. As I say, I'd be shocked if they did actually nerf this card, because I feel like a lot of people, aren't really talking about it that much. But I think it is a really strong card. So maybe one day it'll get nerfed, right? And maybe you disagree, and that's perfectly fine as well. As I say, I think that, because maybe Tom Soraka isn't tier 1 right now, perhaps it's avoiding some of the critique, but I think this is like a 3 of auto include in that deck, and it's like, if they could run 6 copies of this card, they probably might. Because it really is, it really can make that much of a difference. And so yeah, that's Astral Protection. On to some of the Bilgewater cards, and I don't think it'll come as any surprise that Bilgewater features the heaviest out of any of the regions. Just looking at my notes there of the cards I've got written down. Yeah, Bilgewater is the most region I guess I have a problem with, which is a bit of a shame, because it's actually it's between that and Noxus, which is my favorite region, which is kind of like, a bit of a downer for me. They're going to nerf these cards in my favorite regions because, they represent the best decks. But Butcher, I think, is one of them, and I think, again, not an easy card to nerf, I don't think, because if this was a 2/1 grant me 1/1 plunder, you just wouldn't play that. No one would play that card. And so my way of changing this card, my way of sort of, dealing with this card would be to make it a 2/1. But if you can get the plunder off, it has to be a 3/3. You may even want to make it a 4/3 with the plunder. And that might sound excessive, but I think overall the one difference in attack doesn't make too much of a difference, and they've had to plunder. So if you're playing on turn 1, you have to warning shot into Butcher, which obviously, is sort of giving you a lot of tempo, but then, you are also down a card. So it's kind of that sacrifice, which would mean the card would fit within certain decks, but definitely not within others. And if it was just a 2/1 without plunder, you're sort of saying, you have to plunder to make me worth playing. And if not, you've got a really bad card. And that's why I think if you even made it a 2/1 that went up to a 4/3, it wouldn't be that much of a problem, because you're forcing them to have warning shot. And if your opponent has a 1-drop, they're just going to chump it out. And that's fine. And you're forcing it into a certain deck as well. You have to be, very much about plunder. You have to be very much an aggressive deck. You cannot put this in a deck that isn't, reliably hitting the Nexus pretty much every turn, if it is a 2/1. And so I think that is probably the way I change the card. It has to at least be a 3/3. It definitely can't be plunder, grant me 1/1 to a 3/2. The card would never see any play ever. So that's how I think you fix Butcher. Is make it a 2/1 without plunder, and as soon as you saw an aggressive Bilgewater deck, with any aggressive deck, oh, I need to get my early drops out anyway. So I don't think it'd be too problematic either, and I think it would be a suitable nerf to the card. On to our next culprit, Make It Rain, and again, this one is really, really difficult, I think, to nerf. if this was 3 mana with the ability it had now, I think it'd be okay, but like, I don't know, it wouldn't be great at all. You'd have to play it, and maybe this is a way that you can nerf the card, right? Because if it was 3 mana, one, it's a big hit to Misfortune as well, as then drawing second Misfortune becomes really something that you probably don't want to do, and it has to be within a very specific, probably a, you know, sort of all-in keg deck, which is the kind of deck that I like personally. That's sort of my favorite way to play, but you know, that's not for everyone, and so I think that they would only be in that archetype, and you know, you have to determine. I've heard some people call for, you know, oh, it should be choose 2 targets, you know, instead of it being 3 random ones, you choose 2. I actually think that's a buff to the card. I think that would be insane. That's like Static Shock, but better, I think. Like, I think I'd rather, you know, 2 mana to draw is probably more than you want most of the time. So I actually think that would just, okay, you're just giving them a better Static Shock in the region with kegs where, you know, it could be easily become deal 2, deal 3. Yeah, that I think would be absolutely crazy, and I hope that they don't do that. My main way I want to fix this is, I think it should be 3 mana. With the ability it says there, but you have a conditional choice. You can either say, I want you to deal to 2 units and 1 to the Nexus, or I want you to deal 3 to 3 units. I think that that would be a way of keeping the card somewhat competitive. Like, if you need to hit that Nexus, oh, you got Make It Rain. Okay, you can choose to hit the Nexus if you want. You know, it's a guaranteed plunder effect if you want to. It does cost 3 mana though. Or, okay, they've got, you know, a bunch of units on the field, you know, with 1 health. Okay, I can just choose to hit 3 units. I think that that would be the best way of doing it, and the units would still be randomly targeted, but you could just also, you know, have 2 randomly targeted units and 1 at the Nexus. It costs 3 mana. You're given a bit more choice. I think people like having extra choice in the game. You know, it's actually taking some of the randomness out of the card, which I think is something that people don't like as well. So you're actually, you know, giving players more choice. The card is getting worse because it's an extra mana. And I think it would be a sort of a nice resolution, because players can also choose to plunder with it if they so choose. And so it becomes somewhat more reliable as well, but it costs more, but, you know, there's less randomness to it. It's like, it's just, I feel like that would be a nice sort of neat way of balancing the card in a way that's like, oh, useful for some decks, you know, in keg decks, I think this kind of effect is always going to be useful, and in others, you know, it's not that great anymore. And I think that that would help quite a bit. And then we come on to another card that I think, again, one of the more obvious ones, Riptide Rex. This one has been in at least one of these videos about nerfing a card, and Rex is obviously no different. The way you can nerf Rex, I think his cost is fine. I don't like when people want to nerf this card to oblivion. I think that's absolutely wrong. I think most other 8+, 9, 10 mana cards should actually be closer to Rex than Rex should be brought down to them. I think that is the way that people should view it, is late game cards should be sort of game changing winning cards. Otherwise, there's no point in playing them, and that's why you don't see a lot of them, because the others aren't good enough. And that is sort of what I think people need to sort of remind themselves, is you don't want a game where there is no late game cards because they're all so bad. You actually want a game where there is a lot of good late game options in the different regions. The problem is, there isn't a lot of them. And Rex sort of stands out, you know, like Rex, the Leviathan, Asol. You know, these are the cards that sort of stand out. Ledros, maybe. Those are the ones that, like, 8+ mana cards that sort of stand out to you, because there just aren't that many of them, really. And so, how do we nerf Rex? How do we change Rex? Without killing the card, how do we change him? Well, he does have this plunder trigger, which obviously makes him somewhat unreliable, but, you know, plunder isn't too hard by turn 8 most of the time. Particularly in the decks that you're playing him in. You can obviously reduce the amount of times Cannon Barrage goes off. Very easy change. You know, you could just change this to 6 if you wanted to. I don't really know what that would do. I'd have to, you know, they'd have to probably do some geometric calculations of, you know, what does an average board state look like on turn 8? You know, what difference is that making that we take one away? Or the change that I've sort of wanted to have for a while is to change his stat line. I don't understand. This is like a board wipe sort of effect, right? That, you know, and so I've always thought, why does a board wipe effect also come with a 7/4 body? Now 4 we know is an important number in this game, and yeah, by turn 8, you know, normally it's not that big a deal. But I just think, you know, make this a 4/3. Why not? I don't see why Rex should be a threat in and of himself as well. Like, it's like, you know, oh, I'm going to kill your entire board, and now if you don't have a response, I'm also going to hit you in the face for 7. I think it's a very small nerf. You know, it wouldn't take away the key core of the card. The card would still be mostly the same. But then you'd also find yourself outclassed by every other 8, 9, 10 drop that comes down. You know, now you've got this useless body. It's come down, it's done its thing, and now it's like, I'm done. I'm out. And that is, I think, a relevant way to try and, you know, minimize the damage that Riptide Rex can do. So that's my suggested change for Rex. Now we come on to a card that I think I've seen a bit of talk about, which is Ravenous Flock. Obviously a very, very, very good card. The fact that it's damaged or stunned, you know, is really good. Obviously it works very well with Swain. And I think most people have said, you know, this one is quite an easy fix. Just change this number to 3. We all know that 4, as I've just said, is a very important number. It's quite hard to deal 4 damage. So the fact that Noxus gets a 1 mana deal 4 for something that is, you know, not too hard to set up, particularly with Swain, of course, which is his card, it might be a bit excessive. So I think this does need to change to 3. And I think someone pointed out that Black Spear, if you compare Ravenous Flock to Black Spear, I understand that comparing across regions, you know, isn't the most useful thing, because not every region should have the same amount of whatever. But Shadow Isles is the main region for removal spells. Keep that in mind. that is like a core piece of Shadow Isles, is that they have removal spells. So the fact that Black Spear is a removal spell that deals 1 less damage, has perhaps a harder condition. Well, not necessarily in Shadow Isles, but, you know, let's call it a similar sort of condition, but costs 2 mana more for 1 less damage. That does seem a bit excessive. Now, those of you might not be aware, this card used to cost 2, and it was perfectly fine, and it was actually, you know, a pretty playable card. But then at one point they just went on a massive tirade against Shadow Isles, and this ended up being nerfed completely out of the blue. It shocked everyone at the time, like this wasn't really that problematic of a card, and it, you know, it still is a bit baffling to this day. So maybe this card should be buffed, to be honest. But yeah, Flock. Let's go back to Flock. Flock needs to come back to reality here, and you know, be 3 damage. And our final culprit here is Trundle. Now, some of you probably won't like this. You know, some of you like trolls or whatever, you know, and do whatever you do. Probably won't like me saying this. But Trundle does need to get nerfed. Because it wasn't until someone pointed it out to me that everyone goes on about the difference between 3 and 4. And it wasn't they pointed out to me. I think it was a Reddit post. Everyone in this game goes on the difference about 3 and 4 health and how it's a massive leap and there isn't much, you know, that you can do against that kind of health. Well, they pointed out that the difference between 5 and 6 health is also very big in this game. That there is a lot of things that could deal 5 damage, and that there is not many things that can deal 6 damage. And when you think about it, it's kind of true. You know, you've got a lot of things like Swiftwing Lancer. I mean, like, even if the Dragon Challenger, you know, kills the thing, it's got 5 attack. I know you could say if it kills 2, but like, killing one thing is much easier than killing 2 with that kind of card. And Trundle, on turn 5, comes down, and there is no 5, and sometimes comes down on turn 4. There is no 5 mana card or less that sees regular play. There are some that exist, but that sees regular play that has 6 attack. And, you know, none of them have Challenger, that's for sure. And Trundle, therefore, just becomes this really, really difficult thing to remove, especially considering he's in the region with Troll Chant, which when you compare, you know, which when you give Trundle as well, just turns him into an absolute monster. Now, I think Trundle, it's such an easy fix. If he just had 5/5, if he had Garen's stat line, you know, he'd be absolutely fine. And the thing is, he's still in the region that has Troll Chant, so he'd still be much easier to protect than, you know, Garen is, for instance, who doesn't have access to that kind of spell. You know, what's Garen's equivalent? Ranger's Resolve? Well, you know, I just need 2 extra attack. There's plenty of stuff that does that. That'll kill your Garen then at that point. Whereas Troll Chant is an insane card. And, you know, could be on this list as well. I mean, we could talk about Troll Chant and whether that should be on the list. Let's do it. Trundle, I think. Make a 5/5. Troll Chant. I didn't write this down. This is probably one I forgot, to be honest. This card's insane, isn't it? This card's insane. How do you fix it? Do you change this to like -1? I don't know. I don't know how you'd... Like, 3 mana for this card would be, I think, too much. Maybe it's not. Obviously, as I say, you can't really make this fast speed. These kind of effects, you know, can't be anything other than bursts for combat tricks, I think. It's normally pretty bad. So I as I say, I hadn't thought about this one. This just came to me in a flash. It was one that I definitely forgot. And so I probably forgot more as well. But let me know how you would fix Troll Chant. And let me know about anything I've said before. Anything that you think. Or how you would fix any card. Let me know. I think there's a big balance patch coming up. I'm pretty sure it'll get released on Tuesday, I think that's when it'll get released, the notes, right? I'm pretty sure. I've kind of lost track of days. Yeah, and that's going to do it for this one. As I say, please leave a comment down below for what you would do. It also helps out the YouTube algorithm. So, yeah, do me a favor. And, yeah, thanks for watching, guys. Have a really nice day.